Welcome to the TruthLover webinar and podcast. This is Will Pye and a presentation of the Love and Truth Party. Love and Truth Party is a self-organizing, self-replicating community and movement of love and awakening, a wisdom school facilitating and celebrating the true nature of the human being. We exist to empower the deep realization and integration of unitive consciousness of one human being and to inspire action in the world from this place as New Earth Ninjas. We do so in the spirit of play, holding the paradox that all is well, even and including all collective crises, whilst simultaneously being moved to act, to lessen suffering and serve the creation of conscious culture and society. Our projects include distributing 1 million love letters from the universe, inviting people to receive love and the care in these, and within the happiness hacks and other resources found on loveandtruthparty.org. We're joined today by the wonderful Georgi Johnson. Georgi, it's wonderful to have you here. And if I can just introduce you to our viewers, Georgi is a spiritual teacher, therapist, and writer based in Israel. Together with her partner Bart and Berge, she gives trainings around the world. She also offers therapy consultation sessions online. Born in the UK, Georgi is author of now 3 books. The most recent is Nondual Therapy, The Psychology of Awakening. Previous titles include I Am Here, Opening the Windows of Life and Beauty, and Stillness of the Wind, a collection of Nondual Poetry. Georgi is part of the International School of Spiritual Psychology based in the Netherlands and an early participant in the emerging Love and Truth Party, and is often the inspiration behind the I Am Here movement of awakening in the online community. Georgi, it's wonderful to have you here with us today. As you note, they're a founding member really of Love and Truth Party, so it feels especially appropriate to have you on the Truth Lover today.
It's a pleasure, Will.
And your 3rd book, Nondual Therapy. So this seems to be a great topic to explore, a topic of infinite depth and breadth. And I wanted to bring something up because I think for many people who hear the terms non-dual therapy, this might bring up some confusions and some uncertainty, because if there's non-dual, if there's no self, then who would be doing therapy, or how would therapy be working? So I wonder if we can start there. Can you help us get a bit of a sense of what non-dual therapy is?
Yeah. So I think it was Adyashanti that first said that where something along the lines, I can't remember exactly, it's in the book, that when a therapist and client disappear, healing is happening. So
we have the structure, we have the roles being played, but there's something that's happening from the non-duality or from the oneness that's a deeper level of healing perhaps than in a conventional.
The oneness is moving through both the therapist and the client, and the oneness doesn't see separation.
Mm-hmm.
It sees differentiation, but it sees a pool of human shit, basically, and it moves through both the client and the therapist simultaneously. What's happening in intention is that the therapist is putting their own agendas purposefully out the way in order to be of service to the process of the other. But still, it's my experience that both in the law of attraction of which clients are attracted to which therapists, and how the process goes, that there's a healing impact in all directions, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it's in my experience also the case that receiving of coaching or therapy, or however we describe it, is or the receiving of teaching. So there's this extraordinary abundance of insight and integration that's happening with both client and therapist.
Yeah, let me give an example. So sometimes, people have a breakthrough sometimes, and then they'll be so grateful, and they'll say, I'm so grateful to you, Georgi, I'm so grateful. And I feel myself go, kvitch, like, run for China, which shows me that something is not entirely relaxed about receiving gratitude, which is different from showing it. There's something helpless in receiving it. So we're all learning still and evolving all the time, and that doesn't mean that we're all not okay. Mm-hmm. It just means we're not separate, and we all carry a certain psychological forms which we inherit, and from our environment and from our ancestors. And part of our job here is to let those unfold through us. It's like, it's what, it's almost like we're born and, we say to the universe, okay, what have you got for me? I've got this body. I've got these eyes. I've got these legs. I'm female or male. I've got this psychology. I've got these traumas from my ancestors, these parents.
And there's an interesting piece there that you bring up. So when someone has that breakthrough, so when oneness, when awareness, when being has facilitated this experience, which you both no doubt benefited from, I'm sure it was whatever the nature of the breakthrough, whether it was sort of deeply relevant to your personal process, it's a joy and it's an expansion to
always a joy.
Right. And then someone says to you, thank you for giving me that or facilitating that. And there's kind of a truth that, you're sitting there, you're involved, that Georgie was a player in the game. And yet I sense there's like two aspects to the clenching. One is that it's missing the wider point that there's a facilitation happening here beyond you, or a facilitator beyond yourself. But it also sounds like there's something that's opening in you to receive that.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
That's
why I smiled when you said about the love letters of the Love and Truth Party, that it's giving people the chance to receive love. And I smiled partly because it's so much easier to give love than to receive it sometimes. Receiving love and allowing that you're loved can be extremely vulnerable, because it touches all of the places where we still feel that we're not lovable.
Right. And I know that you're a mother. I know that in my experience working with people, I think it's true, period, of people, that generally but I think particularly in spiritual circles, there's a conditioning to be loving, to be kind, to give, to look after others. That's multiplied and accentuated with mothers. And then there's a process of learning to receive that same love that we may be more inclined to give. How has that been for you in that dance as a therapist and working with people, where if I would language it, and maybe you would have a different way, that part of that movement of oneness is the movement of love. The movement of the awareness is there's a quality of love to it. So how has that unfolded for you to open to receiving love?
Yeah, it's like, you mean when I'm actually giving sessions, or in general?
Or in general, yeah.
So it's not just mothers. Our whole culture is conditioned to be active and not receptive. And to be active in the sense that we control our destiny through our free choice from the mind. And out of this comes the belief that we can control what we think and feel. And if we feel bad, we've somehow failed. And so we're very, very controlling. And we believe we can control love. And we want it on our conditions. And our conditions are often places in our psychology, in our psyche, which are blocked, which aren't yet free. And so when love touches it, they literally scream with whatever their theme is, whether it's with shame or fear of intimacy, or maybe pure trauma of being violated. There is a big confusion. If love from a parent has been confused with some kind of abuse, then love can mean abuse or manipulation or being diminished. So it can be even received as a threat.
So there's a definition of love, usually unconscious or held in the body in some way, that might be a very strong block from actually experiencing love or receiving love.
Yeah, and of course the first way that block shows itself is you think that you're receiving love from another person towards your person. There's a misconception around what love is. That it's somehow personal.
Right. So the
and limited. You've only got so much to give, and then you run out.
Right.
And it's measurable that Jim down the lane can get more love than Jackie up the hill.
And conditional. It'll come to an end if the relationship ends, or if I don't.
Or if you're truly seen as being the bad person that you secretly are.
Right. So if we reveal all our ugliness, all
Yes.
our shame, our pains, our discomforts, or whatever,
Our inner evil.
then surely we can't be loved.
Exactly. So how can we just open up to love without keeping a check on it and keeping those mental threat detectors, alert that we shouldn't really be seen? And then, of course, the complaint is that my lover doesn't see me.
Mm-hmm. It does feel like receiving, a large part of receiving is revealing. To receive, we have to be willing to reveal, to open. And that's an essence of any therapeutic work, I would imagine, particularly non-dual therapy and openness.
Yeah, and openness very much depends on relaxation.
Mm-hmm.
So a kind of radical permission to be with whatever comes forward in any moment is very, very important, together with an encouragement of the body to relax. Because if the physical body, literally the physical body of either the therapist or the client isn't relaxing, that openness isn't going to happen. When stress is the slave master, the mind contracts. We feel we're stupid. We feel we don't understand. We stop feeling. We stop sensing. The brain actually floods with chemicals which numb the ability to receive information, whether it's emotional or even love. So relaxation is really a big deal, and relaxation means that the client should get the feeling, and all of us can rest in this, that there is all the time and all the space for whatever is emerging in any moment. It's not even personal.
And how do you go about creating that spaciousness or that relaxation? What you mentioned, that there's perhaps a setting of an intention or an approach, and then a kind of getting out of the way, as it were, putting aside your personality or any agenda. Would you have anything to say about what's involved in creating that relaxation and facilitating that?
Yeah, so the place where we least tend to relax is in the here and now, funnily enough. We're very programmed out of the here and now. So the more we're able as therapists or caregivers or just friends of each other to learn to relax deeply in the present moment, in the body. And what do I mean in the body? It's not like we're separate from the body, but to relax unconditionally with the physical sensations in the body of whatever they are in any moment, because they're quite unstable.
Mm-hmm.
Breathe. Of course, when we start off at the beginning giving therapy to other people, there's an ego structure involved with it. And that ego structure is leaping forward all the time, wanting to fix the other person, wanting to close the story, wanting to take time and space away in order to perform well. It's a bit destructive in a way. So giving up of that, really giving up of that. And then what can happen is sometimes judgment starts showing up about the person. Like, oh, this is boring. Oh, they're a selfish asshole. This kind of thing can come forward too, because that ego is fighting to kind of get in between you. And so also that is, it's not a movement of pushing it away, but totally allowing it and not taking it serious at all. Without a doubt, after 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, without jumping to conclusions about another human being of which we have no idea what's really happening and nor do they, we're exploring, a picture begins to emerge and a channel opens where worthwhile pointers come through, often in the form of questions.
The not trying to fix, or perhaps to say it more clearly, the being aware of that movement to try to fix or to resolve, or
to be a success. It's very selfish to be a successful therapist.
Right. And so it seems, as I reflect in my own experience, there's a great need to be silent. So there's that, really retaining the openness and curiosity as to what's about to be revealed. It's stepping back into the not knowing. I certainly see when sessions perhaps have the greatest fluidity or the greatest ease or the greatest, that sort of quality of magic where stuff is said or stuff is seen that's just really helpful. It's when there's most relaxation here in my body and most openness about, like, where is this going to go? You know, and if there is that movement to tie this little piece up in a nice pretty bow, or for them to get the insight that I think they need to get, rather than staying open in the here and now and seeing what wants to unfold. So does that relate to your own experience at all, the sense of coming back into not knowing?
Yes, not knowing is very, very important, not just in therapy in general. The power of the I don't know, of not needing to make conclusions, not moving with expectations, just staying open. The moment we know something, we close down. And we might know something and it's stored. The brain does its work anyway as information, but not as a conclusion, not as a verdict, not as a determination. But of course, when we are kind of relate, because we're not only talking about therapy, we're also talking about relating in general. So often you can imagine a situation where often the most forbidden and most needed expression are the ones which are most difficult to receive. So we talked about the
as much space as possible.
Yeah, so we talked about the danger of the difficulty of receiving love, but sometimes somebody might have been forbidden and punished their whole life and internalized a mechanism about feeling anger or expressing jealousy. There's certain emotions which are collectively condemned and denied. And when your client or your friend or lover, whoever is finally feels safe enough to express anger towards you, to try and come into some kind of sense of a right to exist, it becomes more important than ever to relax and open up and to not take it personal, to let it just move through you as an energy, and to stay connected, to ask questions. The permission to feel anger, for example, is huge. When we lose our right to feel anger, we also lose our strength, our potency, our truth, our passion, just because of a judgment.
And set up an extraordinary, potentially an extraordinary energy drain to not feel an anger in the system that wants to be expressed.
Takes a lot of energy to sustain the repression of anger.
Yeah, I mean, when you think like anger is so, I mean, it's volcanic. It's so powerful, and to keep a lid on that.
And to lie about it, like the classic passive aggressive. I'm not angry. You can feel how it's even affecting the body, how it's affecting the pelvic area, how it's kind of freezing the cells, the muscles, closing the heart, just by not being allowed to have an instinctive emotion. If a dog is walking past our fence, our dog will bark at it angrily, and then the dog's gone and everybody's happy again, and next day you see them sitting down next to each other totally at peace because he was setting his boundaries. It's a form of communication as well. It's never says that you're bad or that the other person is bad, or that it's going to be there forever, that forever there's going to be war. It's an energy that moves through because something feels too vulnerable in that moment. As something really vulnerable has been touched, which leads to the release of this energy of anger, and it's setting a boundary. Give me time and space. The same thing again. Give me time and space so that I can digest what's happening in this pain, but in the best case scenario.
It feels like you've touched on a couple of key essences, perhaps, of non-dual therapy. One, and I like this, expanding just a general communication. I mean, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if our general communication were a non-dual therapy, were an ongoing expansion?
It is actually.
Right.
We are all responsible for each other, just as if we were clients and therapists of each other. So
really
we're just not very conscious of it right now.
Right. And this inquiry, of course, is about bringing that into greater consciousness and greater understanding and insight. And there was two things that you spoke to there which feel powerful. One is to not take anything personally. I think easy in many situations, very difficult if a partner, for most of us, I would imagine, very difficult if a partner touches that place and then communicates a great anger. That can be challenging to just be,
yeah. So that's important to kind of like maybe refine that a little bit, because to not take it personally means to not to deny it or to freeze the personality, because the personality, you know, basically when somebody's angry at you, especially your partner, you're angry at them. You get angry at the anger. This is the natural response of the psyche. It's the natural movement. But if we have space and time enough ourselves with anger, then we can acknowledge that that moment before we get recruited to the anger field, which is actually where we're hurt. So, you know, let's say Bart says to me, Georgie, you're totally a fat bitch. Yeah. So it hits a place. Yeah, he would never say that, but let's say he did. Actually, he might as a joke, but anyway, let's say it hits a place of pure pain. So that's extremely personal. It's totally intimately personal. So it is personal, but at the same time, you don't need to take it as if the person is everything. So the movement is more, it's not a freezer, a saying I don't have a personality. It's more like saying, oh, that really hurts in part of my personality. This really, really is hurting somewhere.
So again, being seen and allowing that to be spoken, bringing it forth into the communication is helpful.
Yeah. If we weren't to take things personally, then we could really become victims of abuse. And
okay, so I'm hearing there that you're asserting the need for boundaries, or to express clearly when something is not okay, or to speak to the pain that's being felt.
Yeah, and the compassion is, you know, compassion doesn't exclude our own personality. So, but we don't have to identify it with our own personality, our own psyche in an absolute way. You know, I am not my psyche. So my psyche can scream with pain, but that doesn't mean that I'm dying. Mm-hmm. And I'm just talking about the physical level, even not touching the existential level. So also, you know, it's compassionate towards our own psyche to acknowledge when it's wounded, to be vulnerable enough to admit that it hurts. And if somebody who hasn't been allowed to express anger is allowed to release that anger just once without repercussions, that means there's a chance they can touch that deeper pain. Mm-hmm. It finally gets a chance to heal, to be spoken. It gets time and space. It gets that attention of consciousness. And it's all about the healing power of consciousness in the end.
Yeah, I want to come back to that, because that feels huge, what you've just spoken to. The second thing around, so there was the not taking it personally, and you also spoke to allowing things to continue to flow, to allow energy to continue to move. And that seems to be a big piece of the spaciousness and the relaxation, to allow anger to be felt, to allow shame to be felt, to allow sadness to be felt, is an allowing of things to stay fluid, to continue to move. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So things in naturalness are fluid, and they get stuck somewhere energetically. Mm-hmm. And only now science is beginning to kind of go into this border between the physical and the psychological. In terms of energy, one day they'll find something close to the biochemistry of the blood, stress hormones, all the subtle changes that happen with emotions, which is indicating the energetic blocks and contractions and issues which make up the psyche.
Yeah. In the West, we're fairly restricted with neurocardiology and some quantum mechanics and some other bits and pieces. I'm aware of some more edgy research in Russia, epigenetic research, that perhaps is starting to move in that direction you're talking about, to really start to map the means by which that energy has biochemical and genetic effects.
Yeah. So one of the first things to do when somebody is something's not flowing anymore, and you can often tell that because they'll spin into the mind, and they'll distract with the mind, mm-hmm. is to continuously bring them back to the felt sense, mm-hmm. as much as they're able, even the felt sense of the busy mind or of the distraction. What's the feeling behind that? Mm-hmm. And But that's not enough. That's still floating. The felt sense will actually have if they're invited to explore it, it will have a location in the body or around the body. So there can be a feeling of dread or something behind the back, or a sense of being like strangled, or a pain, a deep pain in the sternum, and then there's a way of asking questions to go to the opposite side. So, for example, if there's a block here, then you ask what's going on in the pelvic area, and often they have no physical sensations there at all. Like, I can't really feel it. I can't actually make a conscious connection with it at this moment. So there are layers to contractions, but they're very much reflected in the body, which is amazing, because those areas also later often become muscles, stressed muscles, and it works in both ways. With a good massage, you release emotions, or it can even become disease. An overall, and I don't want to be too, because there's a lot of other factors in disease as well, environmental factors, but there is a relation between where we're contracting our psychological energy and where disease begins to show up. Absolutely. Which is the body's way of working out the psychological issues often. It takes on the job.
Yeah, this is was a key insight in my own journey, to recognize that the physical manifestation was, it's a slight twist to see it not just as a consequence of psychological tension, but as a pathway into the resolution of that psychological tension. So there's the sort of deep gift, or the deep opportunity of the physical manifestation. But I think as you imply, that's there's a degree of complexity around physical manifestation, and there's also perhaps a degree of readiness in each individual as to how much responsibility they're willing to take around that, and indeed how much capacity they have, as you were speaking of going into the body, developing that somatic sense. And what have you found is most helpful when you're working with someone who perhaps has great difficulty dropping out of the mental body and bringing awareness into the felt sense, into the somatic experience?
Yes. So for me, and I don't know if this is the way it has to be, but for me, I'm very hands-off, natural. Like it's almost like friendly conversations, but without too much interference. This is part of releasing agenda. So if somebody is very much going off on one, telling endless stories, the art is kind of to really, 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 really open up the listening, really listen, really be in the here and now, totally let the stories finally be heard. And then what often happens is they become self-conscious. And they'll ask me what I'm feeling. And then I'll ask them to feel the atmosphere of the story. And, maybe for a few seconds they're feeling a feeling, and then they're back again. But it's okay. Because often people that talk a lot haven't been allowed to express themselves. It's the same thing again. It's important for them to have the total permission. And if we're fully present, they feel at a certain stage, I'm wasting my time.
They see the non-directionality or the dead end of the wittering, or
the insecurity beneath the endless talk becomes apparent, in the sense that it stops them, and that becomes the next step.
So that is then felt, almost sort of brings up what it was actually trying to obscure and keep out of the way. And hands off, that was an interesting expression. That suggests, and I think my understanding is correct, that you don't, yes, it's literally hands off, because of course one way, if someone is having difficulty accessing the physicality, is to engage in physical touch, but I imagine that's not usually available within a conventional therapeutic model.
If it's a face-to-face meeting and not online,
right.
Actually, even online, I get them to touch themselves, to contact the body, because you can see so much of the attitude of consciousness by how somebody is touching themselves, and just reflect that back. If they're kind of like, beating themselves up, then you can already bring awareness to that, and have them experiment with a different way to touch their body, to touch it with care, to feel the bliss in their own touch, for example.
I love that. There's such a sweetness and an immediacy and a profundity with self-touch. We often play with my friends and I, and in groups with self-hugging, and I love the insight that you're pointing to there, that it can reveal when how readily and how someone will come into contact with their own physicality. Very, very revealing. It seems that there's something there that's connected to the receiving of love, you know, because essentially if we're cuddling ourselves, or if we're caressing ourselves, we're giving ourselves love, we're giving our physicality care.
And of course, when there's an actual physical session, we can actually, Bart especially, but I will do it too, and the students will do it too, is we actually engage in spiritual healing. So then somebody lies down, it's like a kind of energetic massage in a way. That's to do with very light touch, maybe not even necessarily on the body, and balancing two sides of a polarity, opening different areas. You can, you know, the amazing thing about this is that it's entirely possible, and I believe it's true, that emotions and feelings and contractions and repressions of emotions and feelings has an energetic density. And because it has an energetic reality, it's not just in the head. You can actually interact with it. It doesn't have to even go through the mind. It doesn't actually have to go through the story. It can actually, you can give the love without the embarrassment in a way.
And that's another really powerful piece. Is that not perhaps the turbocharged aspect of, or the evolutionary aspect of non-dual therapy, is that you don't need to go into the story so much. You can really be more in the energetic sensation, in the flow of the energy, in the movement of the actual, the movement of consciousness itself. And you spoke to something earlier which I wanted to come back to, but whilst we still have time, because it feels even juicier and more profound and juicier and significant than this. And that was around the attention of consciousness and the power of the attention of consciousness. That the power of simply bringing awareness to sensation or to contraction. Can you speak to the role of that simple but essential aspect to non-dual therapy?
So it's really interesting, because in many of the schools of psychology, the way it's evolved, you know, they won't admit that consciousness is anything other than the effect of the brain, and the kind of materialistic, at least, outlook is very much not recognizing the healing power of consciousness. At the same time that all psychology and all therapeutic techniques recruit consciousness. They absolutely depend. Even conventional doctors, you know, we feel ill, we go to a doctor, he gives us attention, we feel better. It's like, sometimes we don't even need a treatment. So we're very double in this, in terms of our software of suffering. On the one hand, we utterly crave this, and we know it, and it's unquestionable that consciousness has a healing effect. On the other hand, it's somehow radical to talk about the healing power of consciousness. Because if consciousness has a healing power, then even just touch is a healer. And every mother knows that. You asked about motherhood. You know, when a kid hurts themselves, if you just put your hand on their pain, it feels better. The pain, there's an enormous reduction of pain, which by itself has medical consequences. So when we allow our consciousness to, or in a sense, even better, first it's our consciousness, then it's our kind of loving awareness to meet our areas of pain and suffering, inner pain and suffering. There's a kind of reunion that happens. And it's almost like it's the areas of pain, like, for example, shame, the agony of shame. It's really an agony. Just with the presence of awareness, it's like bits of sand start to flow off this rock and return to the wind of this awareness. And most specifically, the effect is this kind of reunion with purity. In the case of shame, for example, in that contraction. So in a way, you could say that, you know, what is the psyche made of? It's a series of contractions, and what's contracted is consciousness, which has certain qualities, which is kind of connected with our true nature. And so spiritual travelers awaken partly to the quality of consciousness where they have been enslaved. So some will to say everything is love, all is love is everywhere. Some will say everything is light is everywhere. Some will be on the peace trip, everything is peace. Some will be teachers of freedom. Each one is taking a different quality of consciousness. Some will talk about gratitude. And that's a whole school in itself. What's gratitude? It's the universal goodness of all that is. Benevolence in a way, not in opposition to bad. And so these are qualities of consciousness. So part of what we do in the Nondual Therapy and in this book is to try and explore more deeply these qualities. Because it's not only that consciousness itself is healing, there are specific resonances of consciousness which invite certain contractions to unfold. Let's give an example, innocence. Most of us are born with a blockage, energetic blockage of guilt. It's inherited because we ate the fruit in the Garden of Eden, and we're thrown out of Eden, and we're all condemned, and we pass it from fathers to sons and daughters and mothers and onwards. So we're all born guilty before we ever did a thing. And at a certain stage, the world on the outside, the lived experience, confirms this guilt. And mummy says, "You're bad. You wet the bed," or whatever. There is this affirmation of the guilt, and then we go into this program of the binary mind where we believe that if we're guilty, we can no longer be innocent. So we lose this quality of innocence. We lose the felt sense of it. So much so that when there's innocence around, the guilt begins to scream. We feel bad. It makes us feel bad, or dirty, or wrong, or not good enough. So what guilt is asking for, and its other side of the duality is accusation, accusing the world, accusing others. So what it's asking for is innocence. It wants to return to innocence, the innocence of which it's made. It's made of frozen innocence. So that's kind of
the guilt is made of frozen innocence. That just really powerfully evokes that sense that the innocence, the resolution, is actually at the core of the tension, the core of the problem. And so the guilt or the shame, and I know you'd probably make a distinction between the two, but let's say it's guilt. Through the guilt is the pathway to, or in the felt resonance of the guilt, to the innocence, to the rediscovery.
So when we move towards our body in that moment, if we move with the innocence of consciousness, it's got a particular vibration, then it's going to start meeting the guilt. It's like puppies coming home to their mummy. You know what I mean? It's like an iceberg in warm water. It starts to kind of dissolve. And so the consciousness with which we contact ourselves, whether it's physically or energetically or just with our mind, has a certain attitude on it. And that attitude has an energetic vibration. So to be able to start working like this, and people learn very quickly because it's quite natural to it's like a kind of redemption process of true nature. So it's necessary, first of all, to step out of this binary mind that says it's either guilty or innocent, and to allow that it's possible to be innocent and guilty at the same time, and that innocence is the real deal, and that guilty doesn't take away our innocence.
So there's an allowing of the simultaneity of apparent contradiction arising. It can be recognized.
The deeper source. Right. The innocence is the deeper source outside of duality, and it's just frozen up as guilt. Mm-hmm. And what's more, this guilt isn't even separate from the guilt of everybody else on the planet. Mm-hmm. And we inherited it,
Right. There's the not personal bit, right? It's like, okay, so the guilt is being experienced in this body now, but it's not really anything to do with me. It's not mine. It's an aspect of consciousness. It's an aspect of the collective unfolding.
Yes, exactly.
It seems that if I'm hearing you correctly, it certainly would, maybe I'm just speaking to my experience, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, that our capacity in therapy, or our capacity to be bringing that relaxation and to be facilitating that spaciousness, we first have to, not to say that it's not an ongoing process also, but we first have to come into contact with our pains. We have to give presence to, whether with partnership with another or in our own sitting, to bring awareness to all of our discomforts and aches and pains and wounds and so on. And I'm hearing that the taking the role of therapist is to quicken that deepen that process for ourselves as well. To take on that role is to facilitate ourselves as well as those who we're working with.
Yeah. So it's really important what you said, is that you take on the role of therapist. Because that gives some freedom in the dance of life, that you're just taking on a role. And within this role, within this act, this play, this facilitation, it's then possible to really begin to deeply understand and allow the fact that we're not separate, also as therapists, which means that we can ask the universe or God or our ancestors or whoever is beyond me, my ego, to bring the resources as needed. We can ask for peace. You can feel this person really needs peace. So if I believe that I'm the one who's going to give them this peace, it's a lost deal. It's almost oppressive. But to invite peace into the field between us is a whole different movement, and it can come or not. And sometimes it comes later, not sooner, and sometimes it's suddenly there and takes you by surprise. But we're not anything other than a channel. Also, the client is just a channel.
Right, and the recognition of, you touched on it briefly earlier, one of the big impediments in culture, let alone within psychology and therapy itself, is this belief that the physical world is primary, or that we're primarily physical beings.
Yes.
But in the recognition of the primacy of consciousness, or the oneness of consciousness, or the essence of consciousness, it becomes very easy and natural that we can call in or invite in aspects of that infinite and eternal to serve this becoming more consciousness in this process. And it's
and of course that's a movement often of your will, not mine, a surrender of the individual will. Because we can't invite like a shopping list. I want to be healthy, I want to be happy all the time, I don't want to have any pain, and I want to find my dog that got lost. It doesn't work like that. There's a deeper intelligence, and another way
handing over.
You have to be at peace with suffering as an evolution.
A handing over and a trusting in the suffering, in the pains that are presenting. As you've elucidated rather nicely, that to trust that guilt is somehow functional in order to reveal the innocence that it was obscuring, or that physical manifestation is somehow functional to bring that tension into awareness, into consciousness.
Let's give a really simple example just right there. How would any of this information in the book have ever been available to be of service, to be used, any of these insights, if we had not suffered it? Down to the details of the unfolding of different communal afflictions like shame, guilt, sense of abuse, a sense of slavery, a sense of good versus evil. We wouldn't be able to be of service to each other. It would become abstract if we weren't able to, if we hadn't agreed to experience the process. And then the process of one becomes a tool, a facilitator, a support in the process of somebody else. And in this way, we're really evolving together in an interdependent way. So in some ways, non-dual therapy is a total paradigm shift out of regular psychology, because it really rests on this belief of non-separation, of interdependency, of collective evolution, really of non-separation. So there's differentiation, but ultimately separation, separate existence. It's been seen as unreal.
Right.
And after that first experience of being seen, and then of course it becomes so obvious. How could we think that our bodies are separate than the planet, even though they're made of all the same microbes and the same forces of gravity and everything? How could we think that we're separate from our ancestors? Where the hell did we come from? Even a materialist, how can they think that they're separate from their mother and father in an absolute way? And it goes on. How can we think that we're ultimately separate from the other sex, from the males are ultimately separate from females? This is there would be no creation if that was the case. No new babies would be born.
And how could we think that we were separate from our source, however we conceive that to be consciousness?
How could life believe itself? How did we get to be living creatures that believe that we're separate from life? That's exactly the psychic split.
Right. And I love the framing that you offer us of the paradigm shift of non-dual therapy, at really bringing together much deep insight of consciousness itself into knowing itself through quantum mechanics, through direct experience, through meditation and whatever else. And it feels
through everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing that when the universe is knowing itself, it doesn't mind if there's experiences of self-destruction or spiritual enlightenment or boredom. It has an incredible unconditional, what's the word?
Welcoming
Acceptance
or
of
allowing.
all and love for all
Yeah.
experience.
Love,
Equanimity.
I think, is the word.
This is the equanimity.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't compare and measure one experience against another. So that makes it for me a little bit kind of not that enticing when people try to say, I'm better than you, or you're better than me, and you're enlightened and you're awakened, and only me, I'm not awakened. All of this rubbish. It's really not how things move.
Mm-hmm.
According to direct experience, all we have to do is experience how it is to be alive right here, right now. There's no measurement. Measurement is bullshit.
That feels like a really sweet space to come to conclusion. I feel we've just begun the dialogue, and yet we try and keep our conversations to within a bite-sized hour. But I really love that piece of just being here now with our experience, just being present with our experience. I want to ensure that people have the opportunity to connect with you further, George. I know you've got a few websites and a few offerings around the place. The IamHere.life website is the primary one. There's a few others, and we'll put those down, including nondualtherapy.life, and we'll put those down on the notes on Podbean and wherever else we release the podcast. But I am here, www.iamhere.life is the port of call to connect with you.
Killer web address.
Isn't it great? Absolutely. And people can email you from there. People can contact you from there, presumably. Are there any other sort of like current projects or other outlets that you want to share with viewers at this point?
I just have, I could go into self-promotion here, but I'm not going to bother because that's all online. But there is something which is really, really close to my heart, and that is that many, many people hold back from being of service to each other, of reaching out and really being there for each other out of a kind of false sense of ego that they're not ready yet, that they don't have what to offer. And instead they begin then to criticize others who are trying to make a difference, like you, like me, like many, many teachers out there. That's really, really, really a shame. Every single person is of service here, and that includes being of service to each other. Everybody is a channel of the same love, peace, unity, freedom in different ways. Just by agreeing to be here, we are able to advance in a compassionate way the evolution of all of us. And it's immediately fulfilling. They did a test on rats, and they found that rats naturally, if one rat is enslaved in a cage, the other rats will naturally try and get him out of the box. And they tested the rats, and they saw that the reward chemical, the happiness of the rats, because they were able to free the one rat in the box, went up dramatically, immensely. And there's a sad side to the story, because after that, I don't agree with testing on animals, but it does reveal something. After that, they gave the rats antidepressants. And I'm not totally against antidepressants as an emergency measure, but with the effect of antidepressants on the rats, they didn't care anymore about the rat that was in a cage, and the happiness levels went down. So let's be like the rats, let's return to true nature and really be compassionate towards each other wherever there's an opportunity, and towards us.
I love that, Georgie. There's a Verve song that just came into my consciousness from many years ago that talked about numbing the pain but killing the joy. The drugs don't work. They numb the pain and kill the joy. And it feels that's to feel the pain is necessary and a key part of our healing and our integration.
Yes.
Georgie, thank you for
Will.
joining us today. It's been a joy to communicate with you, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers will get a huge amount from it. I look forward to further play with Love and Truth Party.
Yes.
To our listeners, if you've enjoyed this production and would like to support the creation of more similar programming and feel resonance with the call to be of service to an emergent human culture, please join us. You can download love letters. You can sign up for our newsletter. Of course, like and follow on Facebook. Of course, you can find Georgie on Facebook as well. And we're also on Twitter and Instagram. And you may even consider a financial gift at loveandtruthparty.org. Thank you to all of our supporters and contributors. Together, we are creating kind, conscious, courageous human community.